Okay, Nanette, take it away.
Okay. All right. First, I'd like to welcome everyone to Sustainable Southbury's Putting Your Garden to Bed, presented by Michelle McKinnon. I'm Nanette Trinkus, and I'm the co-director of Sustainable Southbury, which is an environmental conservation organization. And we're very pleased that we're sold out tonight. So as people come in, we don't have to wait in the waiting room. So we are expected to have 100 people tonight. So just a couple of organizational items. Does everyone know how to get to the chat box at the bottom of your screen? There's a chat icon. That's where you can leave all your questions, and Michelle will answer those after the presentation. And first, I'd like to introduce the director and founder of Sustainable Southbury, Chuck Liddy. And Chuck will say a few words about our organization.
Hi, everybody. As Nanette mentioned, Sustainable Southbury is an environmental conservation organization. We were founded to help make Southbury a more green and sustainable community. We have a great group of volunteers helping us, and right now we're focusing on four main things. We're focusing on a plastics campaign, a single-use plastics campaign aimed at reducing the number of single-use plastics. And that's a multifaceted campaign, but it's primarily focused on presenting alternatives to everybody on ways that they can reduce single-use plastics, and also reaching out to manufacturers and trying to get them to change their packaging. We are also focusing on food waste right now. We're working closely with the town on this, and we're trying to get a program started at the transfer station where people could bring their food waste and hopefully receive compost back. We're making good progress on this, and we're hoping that we can get a program up and running by next summer. Another thing we're focusing on is on recycling. We're trying to reduce the contamination rates and improve our recycling education in town so that everybody really knows the right way to recycle. It's surprisingly complicated. And next month, we're kicking off a clean energy and energy conservation campaign. It's primarily focused at residents. It's also on commercial businesses, and we're going to be rekindling the town energy task force to try and get the municipal buildings to be both more energy efficient and make better use of clean energy resources. So if you'd like to come join us in any of these initiatives or other ones we might be focusing on, we'll put up the contact information at the end of the session tonight. But just please reach out to myself, Chuck Liddy, or Nanette, and we'd love to have you come join us.
Great, thanks, Chuck. Now we're absolutely thrilled to have Advanced Master Gardener Michelle McKinnon start the presentation. And we thank you so much, Michelle, for all the work you've put into this presentation tonight. And if you could just start by telling everyone a little bit about your background before you kick off the presentation.
Sure. First, I want to start by saying thank you to you, Nanette, and to you, Chuck, because you've both put so much into Sustainable Southbury, and I really admire and salute and support the goals that you have. And I'm very pleased to be here with all of you tonight to share some of this information with you. I am an advanced master gardener. I trained through the Yukon program and became a master gardener in 2013, and in 2018 became an advanced master gardener. And also last year I became an organic land care professional through the Connecticut NOFA program. And I've been a gardener my whole life, even when I lived on a 17th floor apartment and had a balcony, and even when I lived in Manhattan in a tiny studio apartment, I always had plants in my life. So I guess you could call me a real garden geek. But I really recommend organic gardening where possible and a sustainable approach, because I think that those approaches are possible, and we're going to really focus on those as we go through the presentation this evening. So thank you all so much for being here. We're really excited to have this turnout. And let's go ahead and dive in. So tonight we're going to cover some garden do's and don'ts for fall and winter, and that naturally leads into setting up for a good garden year next year. And also we'll be mentioning pollinators as we go through the presentation and how you can have a pollinator friendly yard, especially as it relates to the kinds of things that we do at this time of year. So we can start off the year in the springtime being really excited about gardening again and want to plant all kinds of flowers because we're tired of the brown and the quieter landscape we have in the wintertime, but there's a lot of other things we can do to help pollinators as well. And we're going to have fewer slides tonight so that we can have longer time for Q&A, for question and answer. And at that point, we'll open up the presentation so that we can address the questions you're raising in the chat box as we go along. And feel free to type in the chat box if at any point you're having any problem hearing or seeing the slides. And we're going to have some polling questions tonight to make it a little more fun for you as well. And I'd like to start with one of those right now. So on your screen, you should see a question. What is your level of garden experience? And just click on the answer that best fits your situation. So I'm seeing, looks like everybody on the call so far has some level of experience. So I'll give you another bit of time to vote there. Looks okay. I'll count it down to 0 from 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Great, thanks everybody. I hope you found that fun. We're gonna have a few more of those as we go along tonight. So let me show you how everyone voted, and I hope you can see this on the screen. So we have everybody on the call has some level of experience. We have 31% are beginners, and a little over half of you have an intermediate level of experience, and 4 of you, 13%, are experienced gardeners. So this is terrific. We'll have some information here for all of you to benefit from tonight. Okay, so like everything else in life, it seems right now, when it comes to putting our beds to, our gardens to bed for the winter, we can take various approaches. And the more common approach has been to make a clean sweep. We just level everything to the ground. And we seem to, for a long time, think that that was the right approach. Except we're learning from research every day and from new scientific data, and even just from a lot of our own observations, especially for the more experienced gardeners on the phone and on the webinar tonight. And you've probably noticed that there's still a fair bit of activity this time of year. So instead of treating our gardens as if we were sitting in a bulldozer and leveling everything to the ground, we want to take some new approaches, and we're going to share some of those with you today. And just as people slow down in the fall and the winter and kind of regenerate, a lot of our wildlife takes the winter time to do that as well, but it needs shelter and a place to do that. So some of the ideas that I'll be addressing tonight come to us from the Circes organization. And I put a link here at the top of the slide, and we'll get all of these links out to you in a follow-up email, along with a link to the recording for tonight's session. But a lot of this information is coming from the Circes organization. And I'm going to cover a few of these points tonight, the points here that have the little bumblebees alongside of them. And save the stems, leave the leaves, save a snag and plant a log, and build a brush pile. These are all things we can do to some degree in our properties. And if you're thinking to yourself as you read this slide, there's no way that I'm going to do any of those things in my yard because what would the neighbors think? Well, the last point here on the slide, install a habitat sign, might actually make the idea more appealing to your neighbors. And they might not be as inclined to think, wow, that person is really lazy and not taking care of their property. So the pollinator pathway is a project that's really taking off in Connecticut. A lot of Connecticut towns have a pollinator pathway garden now, and you can get signs from them for just $10. And they have all kinds of terrific information about being pesticide free and planting native plants that are good for pollinators. I really recommend checking out their website when you have some time. These are some charming other little signs that you can find on the internet for your property. And again, it's all about letting people know why you're doing the things you're doing, and also to just celebrate as well the work that you're doing that's helping the environment and helping our pollinators. I have another polling slide for you now. Can you share with us approximately what is the size of your property? Because this will also help us figure out whether or not we have room to do some of the things that I'll be talking about in the upcoming slides. Okay, it looks like quite a few people have had a chance to vote here. Okay, good. I'm going to close the poll now and share the results with everybody. So we have a pretty even distribution now of property sizes. We have some people with less than 1/4 of an acre, and we have just slightly more people that have more than 1 acre. So that's a really good, that's a good variety of property sizes to work with. So that helps us figure out just some of the ideas and evaluate how applicable some of the ideas that I'll be sharing will be. So I'm going to just stop sharing those results now. Thank you all for participating in that poll. So again, I'm going to be sharing some various ideas here from Circes, and the first one is about thinking in a new way about stems. Stems are really high-rise hotels, and even though you might think that sounds kind of odd, it's not so odd when you realize that a lot of stems become the homes for tiny insects, especially for cavity nesting bees. And there are lots of little creatures that look for homes in raspberry canes, blackberry canes, and we all have lots of those around, especially if you have a more rural property. And there are lots of other plants as well that become homes for the little creatures in our landscapes. Any plants that have pithy or hollow stems, such as Joe Pye weed, elderberry, hydrangeas even, and some things like perennials in our flower gardens, coneflowers and black-eyed Susans, for instance. All of these provide good nesting material for cavity nesting bees. In fact, as you walk through your landscape, you may not realize what's going on underneath the covers in your garden. But when stems get broken off by natural causes, or in the springtime, when we do some cleaning up, lots of little creatures are ready to start inhabiting the hollow stems that are left behind. So what can we do to mimic the natural conditions where these insects would find these tiny homes in our landscapes? Well, first and foremost, start by saving some stems. And what this is talking about is coming up, you know, we're in the season where we normally would wipe the slate clean, but this year what we'd like you to try to think about doing is just putting the brakes on a little bit. Leave those stems standing. And when you leave things like black-eyed Susans and coneflowers standing in your gardens, it provides an opportunity for the birds to enjoy the seed heads over the winter. And the stems add visual interest in what could be an otherwise bleak landscape. Last winter, I noticed on one snowy day that the snow was piling up on top of the big heads of the coneflower stems that I had left standing. And it looked like little gumdrops out there in the landscape. And it was really pretty. The goldfinches have already been feasting on the seed heads in my garden. They've been pecking away at the coneflower heads the last couple of weeks. And the black-eyed Susan heads are losing their petals now, so the birds will be going after those as well. And in the wintertime, as winter sets in, there are lots of insects that will also look for an opportunity to take cover even within those seed heads. So things like spiders, beetles, and ants that find refuge in those seed heads might provide an additional nutrition opportunity in the wintertime when the birds come visiting. So they can munch on a crunchy insect, or they can munch on the seed heads. So try to wait until spring to cut back your perennials. So a good time to do that in the spring is once we start reaching consistent 50-degree days. And then when you do start cutting back, try to vary the heights of the stems that you are cutting back. A mixture of between 8 inches and 24 inches high is great for our pollinators because they sort of inhabit different layers in the landscape. And when the bees and other little insects wake up from their winter hibernation, they go out looking for nesting places. And when they find those hollow stems, those open stems in your gardens, then they can set up housekeeping for a new season. And they will lay their eggs in there and bring another generation of pollinators and other helpful little insects to maturity. Dr. Heather Holm, who's written some excellent books on native bees and plants that we can put in our landscape to help them out, has found that when she staggers the heights of the stems in her perennial gardens, it's also a great deterrent to keep deer away, because the deer don't like those brittle stems against their legs, and it helps give those tender perennials a chance to gain some size. And if the deer do happen to come along and munch on them a little later on, the perennials are in a better condition to rebound from that deer damage. So anytime we can outsmart the deer in a natural way, I think it's a great thing. Now, if you feel you need to trim the stems sooner, what you could do is just cut them off to those different heights, 8 inches to 24 inches, like I mentioned. And you could take the trimmings and you could put them, say, in an old flower pot and put the sealed ends inside the pot and just lay the pot down on its side. You might have several of these, and you could just put them in different places around your landscape. Or you could just lay them someplace in a somewhat sheltered area. And again, it provides an opportunity for some little creature to maybe take up residence over the winter or even next spring if it hasn't been found by then. It's kind of like putting buried treasure around your landscape. And one other thing you can do is you can make your own hollow stems, or sometimes they're called bee tubes or bee tunnels. And the picture here on the right is a little bundle that I put together the other day when I trimmed a meadow rue plant. This is a very tall, skinny stem plant that gets these pretty little flowers on top. And a couple of them had gotten blown over, and there was just no way to sort of resurrect them. So I decided I would just go ahead and cut them off. I took the flowers inside, and I cut them into 6-inch lengths and just tied them up a little bit so they wouldn't blow all around. And now I can put them outside. You can visit this website here at the top and read this publication, Nests for Native Bees. And again, this is something we'll provide with you, out to you in a follow-up email. Just if you want to make your own nesting tubes, just don't use any plastic straws. And it's been found that bamboo is also not a good material, because whatever you do make these little tubes out of, you want it to just naturally deteriorate over time on its own. and the bamboo doesn't break down as readily. So save some stems and leave some leaves. Leaves are Mother Nature's blankets. If you think about it, we're all reaching for blankets this time of year, or maybe a jacket when we go out in the evening, and so are all the little creatures in our landscape. And having nesting and overwintering habitat available is just one of the important factors that affect the population levels of all of our native insects and other beneficial insects like pollinators. Even small amphibians and birds can be affected by having some of these natural resources available. Because if we provide opportunities for little crawling insects, that's probably going to be a food source for our songbirds next summer when they're feeding their young. Now, if you're like me, you probably had no idea just how many little creatures are looking for this kind of habitat this time of year. The vast majority of butterflies and moths overwinter in the landscape. It might be in an egg form, it might be in the form of a caterpillar, they might be in a chrysalis, or there are even some butterflies that overwinter in their fully grown adult form. Moths and butterflies hang as cocoons on plants. Sometimes they drop to the ground before winter starts, and they shelter in the leaf litter. And then they emerge next spring when the temperatures again are 50 degrees and higher. Fireflies and ladybugs overwinter as well in the form of eggs or larvae in the leaf litter. And I noticed this year there were lots of fireflies around, more than other years, and I thought that was really encouraging. And if you notice the same thing, give yourself a pat on the back because you made a good home for them. Red-banded hair streaks, that's the little gray butterfly you see here on the black-eyed Susan in this photograph. They lay their eggs on the fallen leaves of oak trees. And those leaves become the first food for the caterpillars when they emerge next spring. Swallowtail butterflies, those beautiful black and yellow butterflies that we often see around Connecticut, they disguise themselves as cocoons and as chrysalis. And sometimes they just look like a dried leaf just hanging off a branch, like the one you see here in the top right photograph. It looks like a real leaf until you take a closer look. And the ground level and all of that leaf litter is providing habitat for lots of other creatures as well, like little frogs and salamanders. Remember those little orange salamanders? There used to be so many of them around when we were kids. Now, here's another idea that might seem a little strange until you hear it explained. I know for myself, I struggle with this idea of leaving the leaves. But what Cersei Society is really getting at when they're promoting this campaign is using the leaves in different ways around our landscape. So for me, the reason I struggle with this idea was that I like to use leaves in my compost. I like to mix the compost, make it a mixture of dried leaves that I collect in the fall, and some of the vegetable trimmings and fruit trimmings from the summertime, and things from my kitchen, a lot of household waste. That's really reduced the amount of garbage that I have to put out to the curb every week. So I need those leaves for my compost. And the other reason I struggle with this is I know that caterpillars drop down out of the tree canopy in the summertime when they reach a certain level of maturity, and they finish their life cycle on the ground. And I didn't want to interrupt that life cycle. But at the same time, I wanted some of those leaves for compost. But then when I heard and read a little bit more about these ideas, I realized that because I have a 2-acre property and 1 whole acre of that is wooded in the back, and it's free from any street traffic and activity like lawnmowers and so on, that's a great area where I can leave the leaves and they're undisturbed, but I can do more than that as well. We know that no one wants to have a messy looking property, and that's not what we're talking about. It's really about, as I said, looking for opportunities to use up some of those leaves in other ways. Of course, you don't want to have a huge pile of leaves like we see in the photograph on the right. You don't want to have a big pile of leaves like that right in the middle of your yard. So as the leaves start dropping down, you can go ahead and use a mulching lawnmower and chop those leaves up and just let them drop down in among the grass. In a couple of days, you won't even see a trace of any of those leaves. And as they decompose, they really improve the soil quality. And as the soil quality improves, the combination of chopping up some of the leaves that land on the lawn in the fall and leaving grass clippings on the lawn in the summertime really improves the soil quality and raises the nutrition level in the soil. So you really don't need to be applying those fertilizers that so many of the lawn care companies and so many of those fertilizer companies try to make us think we need to have in order to have a green lawn. Also, as soil quality improves, the soil is better able to retain water, and it's better able to help the lawn withstand drought periods and rebound once a drought has finished. Now, for larger volumes of leaves, look for ways to perhaps leave them underneath a tree. If you have trees along the edges of your property and around the back of the property like I do, you know, there's no reason why the leaves can't just be allowed to blow there and stay there. You might be able to just let some leaves accumulate in your perennial flower gardens and in your shrub borders. So instead of applying mulch each year, these leaves provide a natural mulch, and you don't have to pay anybody to bring mulch in, and you don't have to pay for the mulch itself because you're taking advantage of Mother Nature's mulch. And again, all of those little layers of leaves in those different areas are providing habitat for all kinds of tiny creatures. Some other things that you can do is when you have large volumes of leaves, you could just move small amounts of those leaves to other areas of your property. And please be very gentle when you do it, because you don't know how many eggs or how many, you know, almost full-size caterpillars have taken up residence in among those leaves. So if you could just very gently, maybe with just a very lightweight bamboo rake like you see here on the left, if you could just gently collect up some of those leaves and move them to some small areas around your property, you could have maybe, you know, 5 or 10 of these little leaf piles, just a few inches high perhaps, and just lay some branches on top to keep the leaves from blowing around. And that's creating all kinds of other little nesting places for these little creatures that are not so visible to us as we go through our days. Now, let's talk about the not so gentle ways to clean up our leaves. So the picture on the right is a very common scene in a lot of our neighborhoods, unfortunately. And I don't know about all of you, but I just run and close my windows, and I'm always tempted to put on my earphones and listen to a podcast whenever these lawn crews show up, because it gets so noisy. And we're living in these lovely little neighborhoods, but the noise to me just destroys all the peace that we have. Maybe there's an opportunity to talk to your lawn crews and ask them to just tone it down, maybe be a little less aggressive with the equipment they use, because the wind, or the wind speed that comes out of a leaf blower that's set at high volume is equivalent to a 150 to 280 mile per hour windstorm. Just think about that, 150 to 280 miles an hour, the velocity that's coming out of those leaf blowers and those leaf machines, like that wheeled one that we see there. And just imagine the effect of that on any kinds of little frogs, the eggs. It probably would just destroy the eggs of any pollinators. It just wouldn't even give them a fighting chance. It would be like putting them in the middle of a hurricane, and there's a small chance that they would survive it. And not only that, the velocity behind these machines just stirs up all kinds of debris in the air. And when you're in a neighborhood where there's a lot of traffic, it blows all kinds of contaminants up into the air. It blows around any traces of pesticides and herbicides that might be left on a lawn, as well as blowing around animal feces and weed seeds, as if we need any more weed seeds blowing into our lawns and properties. And worst of all, it makes the air quality so much worse for anyone who has lung issues and breathing or asthma issues. So we really need to rethink this power equipment that's used for lawn maintenance and see if we could find some better solutions. So just a few ideas about leaving the leaves there. Now, one other idea that's a lot more passive, and that's really easy to do, is planting a log. Now, that might sound like a little bit of a strange idea, planting a log. The idea here is that you're providing, again, woody material for those insects that like to find a home inside little cavities in wood. And there are actually lots of not just carpenter ants and beetles that take up residence in these wooded areas in our landscape, but there's also all kinds of cavity nesting bees that nest in wood. Some nest in the soil, but a lot of them nest in the wood. So the beetles and carpenter ants come along and they make holes in the wood, and they get whatever it is they're looking for, and then they go off and they leave their little cavities in the wood. And then the birds come along, and especially woodpeckers, and they start chipping away at trees that are standing in the landscape, or if you've noticed trees that have fallen in your landscape, maybe woodpeckers come and start pecking away. They're looking for insects. And once those little cavities get created by the birds pecking away, then that provides an opportunity for bees and lots of other little insects to find a home. So again, these are some ideas from a publication that Xerces has available. And this particular picture here is a little area that my husband created this past spring when he planted a new tree at the edge of our lawn. He didn't want the lawn to start getting in around the base of the tree. So we had this small tree that had fallen down over the winter. So he just took it and nestled it down into the soil a bit at the edge of the little planting area, and it just made a really natural looking edge. And at the same time, it's providing that habitat that all those wonderful little creatures are looking for. So it's an opportunity to reuse that kind of material instead of sending it away, chipping it up, and having a truck carry it away off your property. And when it comes to woody material, unfortunately, we have a lot of opportunities these days because of the emerald ash borer. There are a lot of pieces of trees and sometimes entire trees that are coming down because the trees have died. We had to take a huge ash tree down on our property earlier this year. So instead of having the tree company cut it all up and cart it away, we had them leave a 5-foot high stump, and then we just stack the rest of the wood, and we'll use it for our wood stove as the winter goes on. So if you can leave part of a trunk standing, that's a great opportunity as well. And again, we wouldn't expect you to do this in the middle of your front yard, but for those of you who have larger properties, there are probably opportunities to do this as well. And then some other ways that you can keep some of that kind of material on your own property is to build a brush pile. There are all kinds of amphibians, little frogs, little chipmunks, sometimes mischievous insects. They love to take up space underneath and take up the shelter, find shelter in these little piles of brush. There seems to be brush around my property all the time now with the high winds that we have. And after the winter passes, there's usually lots of twiggy material as well. You could pile it up in a more remote area, less visible area of your property, but you could also do something somewhat artistic like the center photograph that you see here. And in one creative application, they actually did something called hugelkultur. And that's the letter C photographs that you see here on the right side of the slide. They built up in layers this natural material in the landscape, and then they planted a garden on top of it. So a great way, again, to make better use of this kind of material on bigger properties. And even if you're involved with conservation groups, these are some ideas you might be able to apply with some of those organizations as well. Of course, you can also plant native plants, and we're going to have some resources for you on the next slide. But before we get into that, we're not going to have a long discussion about native plants, but I wanted to address another polling question with you. So for the ideas that you've heard so far, how many of you are likely to try at least one of these ideas on your own property if you knew that somebody else in your neighborhood was trying them too? Would you be able to leave some leaves? Would you be able to make a little brush pile somewhere, or maybe several little brush piles? And would you be able to save some stems? Wow, these are great. I'm seeing lots of people saying that yes, they could try some of these ideas. And I know that some of you might live in apartments or condos, but if you answer no, could you please share in the chat box some of the reasons why you answered no? And maybe there are some ideas that we could help you out with. This is terrific, everybody. Okay, I'm going to count down to 0, and then I'll close the poll. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, I think a few of you might not have voted, but that's okay. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. So 28 of you said yes, you could try at least one of those ideas. Let me just share those results with you. That's really great to hear. And sometimes maybe you're like me, maybe some of those ideas sounded a little strange, but once I delved into them a little bit and understood what some of the different options were, I absolutely knew that I could try every one of those things on my property. So that's really great to hear, everybody. So we're not going to talk in any depth about planting pollinator gardens tonight or what plants to use for pollinators, but we will also share all of this information on this slide in our follow-up with all of you. We have a lot of great opportunities right here in Connecticut to find native plants. And this time of year, the nurseries will have all kinds of wonderful plants like Joe Pye weed, ironweed, asters, and goldenrod available in their nurseries. So I hope you'll bring some of those home with you. And don't be hesitant to try starting some plants from seed, especially those of you who are more experienced gardeners. The Native Plant Trust, down here at the bottom of the slide, they sell seeds, and so does Select Seeds in Union, Connecticut. Select Seeds sell seeds for a lot of heirloom plants. They also sell the plants themselves, but there was a real rush on plants this year, and they're almost sold out of everything. They do have some seeds left, but not that many. But if you visit Select Seeds website, they have a whole section of just native plant seeds. So I'm confident that you can join me and we can all be part of the change that's needed to help put our gardens to bed in a more ecologically friendly way that will help our pollinators and also be much better for the soil and much better for the environment long term. It's all about making a better place for people, for pollinators, and making a better planet. And I have another polling question for you all, and before I turn this over to Chuck. So just bear with me here 1 second. I have one more question. So I wanted to just ask, now that you've learned some of the how-tos about how to put your garden to bed, are you more comfortable and are you more open to trying some of these ideas for yourself? So we have 33 people on the call. Please let us know yes or no. Now that you've learned some of the how-tos of putting your garden to bed, are you comfortable and open to the idea or trying to some of these ideas for yourself. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, I'll give you one more second to vote if you didn't get a chance to vote. All right, we have 30 people who voted. I'm going to end the poll now, show you what everyone said. Terrific. We had 29 of you, which is 97% who voted, who said that yes, they can try these ideas. And we know not everyone can, but we really appreciate you taking part in those polls. I hope you found those fun. And again, I'm really honored to have been invited to present to you tonight. I'm going to just turn it over to Chuck now, and then we're going to go through the chat and address the questions that you have. Or Nanette, rather. Nanette, go ahead, Nanette, and take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Michelle. That was awesome.
You're welcome.
And we're just going to leave this slide up. So if anyone is interested in volunteering with us, just please contact Chuck or myself. Our information is on the slide. Some of the questions and comments that we received, Michelle, there seemed to be a couple of people that wanted to know what they should do if they live in condos.
Yeah, there's still some opportunity. Of course, it's going to be more limited if you're not allowed to do things outdoors, but you might be able to do things like, say, in a window box, just lay down some of those bundles of little nesting tubes. Also in window boxes or containers, if you have a little balcony, or if you could put a few containers, just say if you have a wide step going up to your front door, maybe you could put a few pots at the edge of the step and put some pollinator friendly plants in there. There are all kinds of smaller types of asters that are really pretty that you could plant in those containers. They have a lot of asters. Usually even at the grocery stores this time of year, they have really pretty pale mauve and darker purple asters. Those are great for pollinators. There's another plant called Calaminta. It has little white flower spikes on it. It is in the mint family, but not something to be feared. It stays nice and small. That's a great plant for putting in window boxes and also into some containers this time of year.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Let me start at the beginning. We have a question from Anita. She asks, will they use the fake black-eyed Susan's rudbeckia? I think she was referring to the goldfinches, perhaps.
Oh, okay. So I'm just gonna, sorry, I'll put the Sustainable Southbury slide back in a minute. Will they use the fake black-eyed Susans or rudbeckia? I'm not sure what fake black-eyed Susans means, but I know on the black-eyed Susans in my garden, the black-eyed Susans I have are real. What I would say is, I'm not sure what the plant is, Anita, that you're referring to, but what I would say is just observe, just watch what's going on in that particular area of your garden this time of year and see if there's any activity out there. See if there are any birds, see if there's any insects. I used to think there were no insects on top of my rudbeckia, and lo and behold, when I got up close and started paying attention, there's lots of little caterpillars on the tops. And I also find that the black-eyed Susans don't tend to attract pollinators until they've been blooming for a week or so. So I hope that helps answer the question, Anita.
Okay, thank you. Shay has a question for us about can we drill holes to facilitate nests?
I'm glad that question came up because there is some controversy about drilled wood for pollinator habitat. And the reason is that it tends to become infested with mites and predatory insects that will consume the bee larvae that are in there after the bees have made their nests. So if you're going to drill into wood, you really have to be very conscientious about cleaning out the drilling spaces, those little cavities, every fall. And actually, before you drill into it, you have to make sure that there aren't any little bee larvae in there. It's really preferable to use those nesting tubes instead, because they just sort of deteriorate on their own over time. And it's the closer you can be to a natural situation, to what's really going on outside in the outdoors, the better. And the drilled wood it was very popular there for a few years, and different companies sell those bee hotels, but they're really not the best idea. The tubes are a much better idea. The tubes just have to be closed at one end and about 6 inches long, and some various size diameters are good. If they're a little too big, a lot of bees are really tiny. They're not going to lay their eggs into a really wide opening. It has to be pretty small. If you think about breaking off a coneflower or black-eyed Susan, just think how tiny that stem is. So just keep that in mind if you want to make your own nesting material, your own nesting tubes. But great question, glad you asked it.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Mary Ann. She said that she's overrun with American bamboo. Is there any way to control this invasive plant?
Oh my goodness, Mary Ann. My sympathies go out to you. There's a law in Connecticut now that anyone who plants bamboo has to, they're legally responsible for cleaning it up if it does run, and they have to plant it with an impermeable barrier. Now, other than about 10-foot deep ledge, I don't know if anything is strong enough to hold back bamboo. If it's coming from a neighbor's property, my best advice would be to contact your municipality and talk to them. That's unfortunately the best advice that I can offer. If it's coming into your property, you can keep trying to cut it off, and it will starve the roots that are coming into your property, but it probably will keep resprouting. But contact some officials. That's my best advice.
Okay. We have a question from Patrice. She would like to know about how she should close up her vegetable garden.
Sure. So Patrice, there's sort of a new approach when it comes to vegetable gardens as well. But one thing that has not changed is if you have any diseased material like tomato plants, often this time of year, they start falling, prey to various diseases. I know squash vines, they almost always get powdery mildew. You want to gather up all that material as best you can. Gather up any old infected leaves that are on the ground and dispose of it. Now, don't put that in your compost. If you have a secluded area of your property where you can put it, where it won't spread disease spores again next year, you could put it there. Otherwise, that's something that you could put into garbage bags and dispose in the trash. Connecticut no longer allows disposal of yard waste, but if it's invasive plant material or diseased plant material, you're still allowed to put that in your garbage and dispose of it at the curbside. As for the things that have changed with vegetable gardens and closing them up, it's recommended that you no longer pull up old vegetable stems. So for instance, in the spring when my peas were finished, I just cut them off at the ground level now. And the reason for that is all kinds of microbes in the soil have set up a relationship with the roots of that plant. And you want to keep that microbial activity going in the vegetable garden, because those microbes help bring the nutrients out of the soil to plant roots. So even if you're cutting the plant off at ground level, it's keeping the microbes and all that little bacteria in the soil, it's keeping them fed. So that's that's the approach we take now with removing that kind of vegetable material. And not a bad idea to layer down some leaves off the trees on top of your vegetable beds, put some branches on top to hold the leaves down in place, and just move the leaves out of your way next spring and go ahead and plant it fresh. Hope that helps, Patrice.
Okay, we have a question from Neil. He'd like to know how you treat Solomon seal and agastache before winter, and also daylilies.
Okay. So all three of these, if I could, I would leave them standing. I leave the agastache standing in my garden. All those little songbirds love to peck away at the seed heads. So the finches, the chickadees, and also the juncos, the little black and white birds that show up when the weather gets cold, they all have a great time pecking at those. Solomon seal, I think, gets some berries on it. I don't know if there are any little creatures that eat those berries. And I also don't grow that myself. I don't know if it has hollow stems, but if you feel you need to cut it back a little bit, this fall, if it's in a sort of visible area that you want to tidy up, cut it back to just those 18 or 24 inches. And then, like I said, take the remnants and put them aside somewhere, and maybe some little creature will get some shelter in among those this winter. And daylilies, I noticed that those stems are hollow as well. So they do look a little ratty this time of year. Again, you could just pull them up, and I don't even cut them off. I can usually just pull them right out of the ground, and it leaves the plant intact. I just pull the flower spike. Again, just lay them aside, or trim them back to that 8 inches to 24 inches. And any of those options would work with those plants.
Thank you. Anne Marie has a question. She says her mums never survived the winter months. What can she do?
Anna Marie, don't buy them. Unfortunately, a lot of the mums that are sold today are not meant to survive the winter unless you have an extremely sheltered area in your gardens. The way that they create those plants is it's not one plant in that pot. What they do is they take dozens of cuttings and they smush them all together, stick them in some soil, and propagate them that way. And that's what you're getting when you buy those mums at the grocery store. You have to, typically you'll only find perennial mums at specialty nurseries and some of the better high-end nurseries. I know that I can order those from a mail order place in the Midwest, but I'm trying to not mail order from very far afield anymore. There is a place in Rhode Island called Avant Gardens, A-V-A-N-T. I'll just type that here in the chat box. Avant Gardens sells perennial mums. I know that's one place for sure that you can get them. So that's why they're not making it through the winter. So I hope that helps, Anna Marie.
Okay. Leslie has a question. Do you have advice on getting rid of invasive insects in vegetable gardens?
We don't have enough time tonight, Leslie. I think well, I'm not sure what you mean by invasive insects. Maybe you just mean a lot of pest insects. The only thing I do in my garden is I use soapy water. So I fill up a container before I go outside, and when the insects are around, I just always take that container out, and I call it giving those insects a bubble bath. That's my best advice. There are a lot of great websites where you can get information about insects and how to control them, and it's all organic. It's called Big Bug Hunt. They have great pictures. So if you can't identify what an insect is, you can usually pretty easily find the pretty common ones at that website, and they'll give you advice there as well on how to how to try to control the population numbers. But I don't use any pesticides, because as sure as you use some pesticides, it creates an imbalance in the landscape. So you want to try and let nature take its course. Let the lady beetles come in and, you know, feed on the aphids and feed on the eggs of those harmful insects. We had tomato hornworm on a couple of our tomato plants, and I pointed out to my husband little white things on the back of the worm that look like rice. That is where a parasitic wasp has laid its eggs inside that caterpillar, and they're slowly taking the life out of the caterpillar, and those little white eggs hatch into predatory wasps that take care of those harmful insects. So start with big bug hunt, and so you can send me an email anytime, you know, with questions about some of these things that you're seeing. But to my knowledge, there aren't any technically invasive insects in gardens. Sometimes we just feel invaded because there are so many of them.
Okay,
Okay, hope that helped.
thank you. Rhonda has a question. What plants, if any, are safe to cut down, such as iris, daylilies, and bee balm?
Okay. Bee balm is another one that if I could, I think I might leave that standing. Although I have to say, I'm not sure that I've actually seen the birds pecking at it in the wintertime. But yeah, daylily plants, I just mentioned that a few minutes ago. You could cut that back. If it's tidier, you know, cut all of them back to 8 inches. Iris is a good idea to cut back because they tend to get an iris leaf borer in them. You could cut the iris back to probably, you know, 3 or 4 inches. There is a company called Schreiner's Iris. I only grow, I think it's Schreiner's Iris, I believe is the company name. I would go on their website and see what they say about how to treat iris in the fall, because I usually don't do anything. I only have 1 iris, so I'm not that much of an authority on what to do with iris. What I would say basically when it comes to cutting things back is pretty much anything with a seed head. So those black-eyed Susans, the coneflowers, your Joe Pye weeds, even my hydrangeas, Agastache, or another word for Agastache is Anise hyssop. Those kinds of things, those seeds are great food sources in the wintertime for our birds. I just call it my natural bird feeder. There's another website, perennials.com and perennialresource.com. I'm just typing that into the chat. Those websites could give you some good tips on specific varieties of plants and whether or not you should cut them back or not. There are a few things like Russian sage and lavender that you should never cut back until you start seeing new growth in the springtime. And some things that tend to not make it through the winter, something like, I'm trying to think of the name of the plant and it's escaping me. It's a type of spurge. I can't think of the common name, but it's a type of spurge. And these sometimes are a little tender in our climate. When that's the case, it's better not to cut them back. It's better to wait until the spring with anything that you've noticed seems to die off in the winter landscape. So I hope that helps in terms of what to cut back and where to get more information.
Michelle Sue also asked about hydrangeas, which you already addressed. She also wanted to know about rose bushes.
So hydrangeas, to get a little further information on that, I would say visit provenwinners.com and search on that site. And actually search on that site about rose bushes too. I'm not a rose authority, although you could try the American Rose Society and the Connecticut Rose Society. Both of those would be great. I'm sure they would have information about how to prepare those plants for the winter, or if you need to do anything special for the winter time.
Okay, Amy has a question. I don't see any goldfinches on our coneflower heads. Any idea why? We normally get a lot of goldfinches.
It could be the type of coneflower. Maybe, I don't know if you're planting some new ones this year. And things go in different cycles in different places. So the goldfinches might be pecking at the seed flowers here. Maybe they're already finished at your house. I don't know. But I'm confident that if you have a variety of different seed heads in your landscape and you leave those seed heads standing, you're going to get some kind of birds visiting over the next few weeks, and especially over the winter.
Okay, and we have a couple of questions about hydrangeas from Paula and Amy. They want to know what they can do to have them bloom, and Amy wanted to know if holly tone helps hydrangea get more blooms.
Yeah, holly tone can help, but there are certain hydrangeas that are very finicky because the flower buds tend to freeze off certain types in the wintertime. Again, just in the interest of time, the very best advice I could give you is go on provenwinners.com. And I'm just putting that in the chat box, and search just using the search term hydrangeas. And they have a terrific chart that shows when you should prune certain hydrangeas and when to not prune them. Some people don't get flowers because they're pruning their hydrangeas at the wrong time. Mountain hydrangeas and hydrangea arborescens, the old-fashioned Annabelle hydrangeas, tend to be a little more reliable when it comes to blooming. Endless summer hydrangeas, just typing in the chat box. Don't buy them, don't spend your money on them. Maybe Proven Winners is going to come after me for saying that, but so many of my garden customers have trouble with that type of hydrangea. They're not endless summer, they're endless pain. So don't even bring them home. There are lots of other choices of hydrangeas now that are better. So I hope that wasn't too depressing for you, but that's my best advice on some of the types of hydrangeas that are in the marketplace these days.
Okay, I think we're just about ready to wrap up, so I'm going to do 2 more questions, and they are about how to get rid of pest eggs in vegetable gardens, and is there anything to do to kill their eggs in the winter?
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to try something this year that I haven't tried before because I was inundated with cucumber beetles this summer. I'm going to try ordering nematodes. Again, in the chat box. Whoops. Gardens Alive is a great website to get information about how to control eggs of harmful insects. And nematodes are the solution that I mentioned. Now, there are different types of nematodes for different purposes. And some you apply in the fall, some you apply in the spring. There's another website that might have some solutions. Garden Safe might sell nematodes as well, but just go on the internet and search for, on the term nematodes for sale or something like that. And, really do some research and make sure you're getting the right ones. And when it comes to things like slugs and snails, there are some organic solutions. If slugs and snails are a problem, Sluggo is one. And then there's actually a product called Slug and Snail Safe. And those 2 products, Sluggo and the Slug and Snail Safe, are both approved for organic use. Hope that helps.
Okay. Michelle, we can't thank you enough.
Oh, you're welcome.
All of your wonderful information.
You're welcome.
We want to thank everyone for attending tonight, and we will be sending out an email with all this wonderful information and a recording of tonight. So thank you again, Michelle. And
You're
thanks,
welcome.
thanks to everybody at Sustainable Southbury, our team, for all their help with advertising and in sending out all the information. We really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
I
Good
just
night,
want
everyone, and stay well.
Yeah. I just want to shout out to Nanette for the beautiful graphics on the title slide we had tonight. And I think Sustainable Southbury is so lucky to have such a talented graphic artist helping you all out.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Good night. Good night, Gary.
Good night.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.